RMC is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your retro gaming with their joysticks featuring genuine Sanwa arcade parts. And OneClickPrint.com for your photos on canvas, acrylic, gifts and more. Local craftsmen and global delivery.
Hello cave dwellers, welcome to this, the third and final part of our Dragon32 Trash to Treasure series. Today we need to clean up the machine to get it looking like new. We need to use it in earnest, and I'll give you my impressions of the first proper use of the Dragon32 that I've ever had, give you my opinion and show you as many tapes as I can, which is quite a limited selection but hopefully enough to give us a flavour. We also need to find out exactly what happened to Dragon Data Limited, the producers, the Welsh producers of the Dragon32. What happened next in that story? And why, in 2017, could you still buy a brand new, sealed and boxed Dragon computer? Find that out and more, but first of all, it's time to don the rubber gloves and get scrubbing. Our first job today is to give the Dragon a clean, so let's strip it down and give it a scrub, and while we do, we'll pick up the story from the success of Christmas 1982, by which time 40,000 Dragon32s had been shifted. Confidence at this time was good, and Dragon Data were planning an export drive to push the product into new markets, including the USA, where the Tandy colour computer already had a footing and was, as we saw in part 2, practically identical to the Dragon. But if they could undercut it on price, then it might prove to be a successful move. There is our grubby case all stripped down and ready for a soapy bath, and the sticker which we'll replace once we've cleaned it all up, and I'll remove now by softening up the old glue with a heat gun. Now following that Christmas of '82, Dragon Data made aggressive expansion plans including new Dragon models. The Dragon 64 would be identical to the 32 but with 64K of RAM, the addition of an RS-232 port and a second basic ROM. And an upgrade option was promised for Dragon32 owners, although this wouldn't materialise until 1984 and would come in the form of a full system board swap out. Details of the other new machines promised were not as forthcoming, but they were known as the Dragon Alpha or Professional, which would include two 6809E CPUs, and the Dragon Beta or 128, which would run a promised OS 9 operating system. These systems, however, would never make it past the prototype stage. Despite the optimistic outlook though, the future, much like the water in my washing up bowl now, was starting to look murky. For Dragon Data, a major problem was the software. The machine was lacking the killer app or game that drove people to the system. It didn't have the blockbuster titles that the ZX Spectrum or Commodore 64 had, and Dragon Data seemed less willing to partner with software houses to support the creation of high quality software in the same way that its competitors did. That brush you can see, by the way, is just a regular shoe cleaning brush. I find it really useful for getting into all the nooks and crannies when cleaning up a case like this. Definitely something to consider for your toolbox. On the subject of software, what was available was on average more expensive than its competitors. Sometimes a Dragon cassette would actually cost you more than double that of a competitor's, if indeed you could even find the Dragon software on the shelves. Marketing and retail didn't appear to be Dragon Data's forte. To understand what happened next, we really need to understand the financing of Dragon Data, so we'll come to that next while we strip and clean the keyboard. It's a lovely mechanical model that feels really nice to type on, an expense that was often overlooked by other manufacturers who opted for membrane keyboards to cut costs. In my opinion, every computer is enhanced with a mechanical keyboard, so we'll show this one the appreciation it deserves with a cleanup. Now, Dragon Data ran independently but had a parent company, Metoy, who were at this stage losing money in their sector, the toy industry, and so decided to look elsewhere for financing. They secured it from GEC or General Electric Company, Prudential Insurance and the Welsh Development Agency, who were now shareholders and financiers to Dragon Data. In response, Dragon upped production of the Dragon32 and the Dragon64 would arrive in August 1983. The drive to sell internationally also went into action with Tanno Corporation producing and distributing in the US. Despite all of this, for Dragon Data and now around 80,000 Dragon owners, the demand for their machines had cooled significantly. The bumper sales leading up to Christmas 1982 were not to be repeated in 83. Killer software didn't arrive and Dragon Data were amassing a warehouse full of unsold machines, unable to effectively market and shift them. Optimism for Dragon was now waning and unsurprisingly shareholders asked Managing Director Tony Clark to resign and GEC put their man, Brian Moore, in charge in September 83, which is where we'll continue the story from when we see our machine in action. Back to the keyboard, and the beauty of the black keycaps is that they hide the dirt very well, but there is a lot on them and it's worth taking the time to give each one a scrub down with the toothbrush. You want to be absolutely certain that these are dry before reuniting them with the keyboard. Moisture gets easily trapped inside them, so give them a tap to make sure as much of that is out as possible, and I sped up the process with a blast from a hot air gun and then left them to dry. As we pop them back in now, you can see just how lovely and clean they are. That is much better. With everything back in the case, the finishing touch is of course that sticker, which was sent to me courtesy of Rob Taylor, so thank you Rob very much for sending that in. And you can see the black ink of this is much darker than our old original faded sticker. I think I've managed to stick that on straight, and with a quick wipe around to remove any old visible glue, our Dragon is ready to take flight. So now our Dragon's working and looking great, I wanted to know, what did people do with it? Well, for a start, for some reason an affinity arose between the Dragon and adventure games. Perhaps it was because it was better at handling simple graphics and text than high-speed arcade games. When the Dragon was first launched, one of the most common inquiries to Dragon Data was not about configuration or machine code tips, it was pleas for help in finding the whereabouts of the mushroom in the game Madness and the Minotaur. The first game I tried is Quest, which is an adventure game, and as you can see, it's written entirely in BASIC. It was a fun introduction to the machine for me, and no doubt for many others back in the day, even if I did lose my entire party down ravines while aimlessly wandering around the world. It's quite basic in its presentation, but it seems to work. The next of my small selection of tapes I tried was Flipper, which is a game of Othello, and you can play against a friend or the computer. It played well, although it did make regular references to the TRS, indicating that this was likely a direct port from the Tandy Color computer, with no effort made to change those references in the code. I imagine that was quite a familiar sight. I encountered my first failure on the next tape. This was Killer Caterpillars by Microdeal, one of, if not the most prominent developer for the system. Sadly, the tape wouldn't load, and no amount of volume tweaking or tape retensioning was able to fix that, so on to the next one. Bug Diver is our first arcade game, and it's published by Mastertronic, who catered to nearly all 8-bit micros here in the UK, with their distinctive logo on the cases. Bug Diver plays like Frogger as you make your way down to collect gems on the seabed and back up to the speedboat on the surface, with the ever-prominent green border around the screen. This machine doesn't get any less green the more you use it. Gaming, I was starting to understand, wasn't really the machine's strength, and with a very limited selection of tapes, I wasn't about to disprove that theory. So what else did people do with it? Well, programming of course, and the machine would have been shipped with a guide to Microsoft's Enhanced Basic, as well as this tape, which conveniently has the examples saved on it. Kind of feels like cheating, but here they all are, all the usual examples of basic programs to try and hook us into writing our own. And like most of these Introduction to Basic series, there's a heavy emphasis on the visual. Examples of how to draw shapes and patterns on the screen to really try and spark your imagination and get you interested in coding. First impressions of our now lovely clean Dragon then is that it's a very capable machine, let down slightly by its graphical capabilities, but for programming it's absolutely great, and even more so if you have the Dragon 64 with that extra bit of memory. One feature that I really like is the reset button on the side here, because if you hit that it will stop execution, it will reset the machine, but it won't clear the contents of the RAM. So if you code yourself into a corner, you get stuck, you're in an infinite loop that you can't break out of, or any other problems like that arise, you can just hit that button and you haven't lost your work, it's still in memory. You hit list and your program's still there. That's a feature that was very desirable, and Commodore 64 owners, for example, would short out 2 pins on the expansion port on the back to achieve the same result, or you could pay a little bit more for a cartridge that sat in the back and effectively just shorted out those 2 pins when you pressed a button. So that's a really nice touch to have on there for all the programmers. And of course, as we fully expected, if you're already familiar with the Tandy Color computer, then yes, this will feel very familiar, and we explored why that was in part 2 of the series. Now, while I continue to get familiar with this machine, why don't we find out what happened next with Dragon Data Limited. Well, it was more bad news, I'm afraid. Despite the best efforts of GEC's man Brian Moore, drawing on much more marketing experience than Dragon Data to shift excess stock and turn the company's fortunes around, they just couldn't pull it off. The story of Christmas '82 was high demand and not enough stock. Heading into '84, it was the opposite story, and the company was in a lot of trouble. Efforts to sell the Dragon internationally had continued to be made. Dragons were distributed in Spain by ICS, who now wanted a license to manufacture the Dragon on home soil. In May 1984, the company Eurohard SA was formed with this sole intention, and a deal was agreed with Dragon Data to license production at a cost of £7 per micro to cover Spain and Spanish-speaking markets. The deal was thrashed out and signed just before Dragon Data could no longer support itself and went into liquidation. Eurohard received news that their agreement now meant nothing. Undeterred though, Eurohard now had to renegotiate with the receivers if it wanted a new agreement. Meanwhile, the consortium, led by GEC, now that Dragon Data was no more, opened talks with Tandy, who sent staff over to inspect the plant in Wales with a view to making a bid. Perhaps all that stock could easily be rebadged and tweaked to sell as a Tandy Color computer, but from those talks a deal just didn't materialise. It would be Eurohard then who obtained Dragon Data's assets, including 13,000 Dragon32s, 64s and disk drives for £1 million. They aimed to have their Spanish production facilities up and running in October 1984, assisted by Touchmaster, a company led by ex-Dragon Data chiefs Brian Moore and Richard Wadman, as well as the remaining staff. Touchmaster would provide support for the Dragon from the original Dragon Data premises in Wales, and GEC would continue to be responsible for marketing the Dragon in the UK. Here in the UK though, the writing appeared to be on the wall. Even Dragon User magazine was now acknowledging the depressed state of the Dragon market in 1984. UK retailers emptied their shelves and didn't replenish Dragon stock, and what few stores did still stock it, such as the high street store Comet, were selling the Dragon32 for as little as $79.99 or the 64 for $129.99. But dedicated Dragon users clung on to hope. At the 6809 computer show held in London in November '84, Eurohard shared the encouraging news that an enhanced Dragon 64 was coming to the UK, and that would be manufactured at their plant in Spain. The new models would be named the Dragon 100 and 200, with only the 200 being available in the UK, and a 300 series was also being considered, which would incorporate a disk drive. The only details they shared at this stage were that it was to have improved graphics capabilities, Spanish characters to cater for its home market, and a redesigned keyboard layout which would cluster the arrow keys together instead of having them at opposite sides of the keyboard. They also had ambitions to create a Dragon MSX computer, and a few hundred of these units were apparently made but never released to market. Eurohard also had desires for the Dragon to be the school computer of choice in Spain, with one regional authority in Spain committing to the system, and this was to be backed up by a Spanish TV series along the lines of those broadcast for the UK's computer literacy project in the early 80s. Just like Dragon Data, however, Eurohard's ambitions were greater than their revenue would allow. They did get the 200 out to market. That was effectively a Dragon 64 with a more robust case that you could put a monitor on top of. And they did get a 200E out to market, which was the same again with a character ROM that allowed for lowercase characters. Small tweaks that really didn't impress, and sales were low both in Spain, which was now their home, and abroad. Poor sales, strong competition, and of course a lack of money meant that Eurohard did indeed go under. By 1987, it finally closed its doors and the Dragon became a myth. Or did it? Well, if you recall, the distributor of Dragons in the US was called Tano, and the Tano Dragon 64 flopped only for the excess stock to be bought up by California Digital, who, all the way up until early 2017, 35 years after the original Dragon's release, were still selling sealed, boxed, new Dragon 64s. There is, of course, a lot more to the Dragon story than we covered today, but I hope you enjoyed what we did touch on, and I hope you enjoyed the restoration process. I've really enjoyed bringing this Dragon back to life. It's also worth mentioning that OS 9, which we mentioned earlier, that did get a release for machines with 64K and higher. It's a multi-user, multitasking operating system for the Dragon, and there are rumours circulating that GEC originally invested in Dragon so that they could get their hands on the development of that operating system for military purposes. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but maybe some of the links below can lead you down the rabbit hole to read more into that. It's an interesting story. I think the next thing I need to do with this is find out a better way of loading software into it, because these tapes are becoming increasingly unreliable. So whether I plug an audio cable into it with my phone or find an SD card solution, I'm not sure. If I find a good solution, I'll certainly make a video and share it with you. But all I know is I'm going to be putting a lot more hours into getting familiar with the Dragon32, and if I ever get hold of a Tandy colour computer as well, we can do a side-by-side and just see how similar these are. So until next time, thank you for taking the time to watch. I hope you enjoyed the series as much as I enjoyed making it. Please leave your comments below, your thumbs up, your thumbs down, and take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Until next time, take care and see you soon. If you enjoy my content and would like to toss a coin into the hat to support the cave, then check out patreon.com/retromancave and join the official cave dwellers you can see on the screen now. Thank you for your support.